Mark chapter 3, 7 to 12. We have a problem. We have a big problem with appearances. We regularly judge books by their cover. We judge people by their toothy smiles or fluffy hairdos, for good or for bad. We judge by what we see. In Mark chapter 3, verse 7 to 12, you get all these people pushing and shoving to get as close to Jesus as possible. They are full of need. Their need is shouting out of them. And they almost shove him into the water. And he has to climb on a boat. And you can see him there sort of holding his balance as he talks to this crowd of people. I don't think the water would have stopped them. They must have had the disciples standing like a bunch of bouncers on the coast to stop them wading in. They were judging by an appearance. The appearance was that here was the solution. And here is my need, here is the solution. Gimme. It was like that. So what did they see? They saw a miracle worker. They saw this remarkable, charismatic man who could heal. And they'd come from everywhere and they were pressing, and Jesus got this little boat ready just in case they shoved him in the water. It was a crowd. This is the first time a crowd appears in Mark. It's not the last. But it was a crowd verging on a mob. And they were unreasoning. You know, crowds don't have attitudes. They have moods, and the mood sort of shifts. They'd heard about what Jesus was doing. And so they'd come from him, it says, from Judea and Jerusalem, which was south. From Idumea, which was deep south. Imagine walking from Cardiff to Llandudno to see him. That sort of thing. And the regions across the Jordan from the east, and from Tyre and Sidon in the north and in the west. So what Mark's saying was literally they came from everywhere. They came from everywhere. Now mobs stampede, they trample people at football matches. Lynch mobs have murdered people. And crowds suspend their judgment and do things they wouldn't do if they were alone and thinking things through. And the mood shifts because crowds are unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Remember that picture? Have you read Acts 19 where there's this crowd and they're shouting, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians," for 2 hours and nobody can get a word in? It's the mob spirit. Think of Hitler at Nuremberg. You know, that kind of what an evil man can do with a crowd. So Jesus knew this, and so he took precautions with the boat, but he also knew that his time hadn't come. He knew that the conflict that's mentioned in verse 6, they took counsel to kill him. He knew that conflict was getting sharper, getting heavier. But he knew that this wasn't the climax of his time. He knew that the day was coming, that Jerusalem was down the road, a little way yet. So what did they see? They saw a healer. But the demons, this is the way that Mark expresses it, these people, some of them had demons, and the demons were saying something different. They were saying, "You are the Son of God, you are the Son of God." And Jesus commanded them to be silent. Now you have to know that Son of God meant something different to them than it means possibly to us. In Gentile nations, kings often had the name Son of God. In Egypt, the king or the pharaoh was called the son of Ra, the god. And Roman emperors, many of them had the designation Son of God or even God. Now in the Old Testament, the word Son of God could refer to somebody near to God or dear to God. Like angels in Job chapter 1 verse 6 are called sons of God. And Israel itself in Exodus 4 is called the Son of God. And the king of Israel is called my son in 2 Samuel 7. So maybe the demons knew this kind of evil, unclean knowledge that Jesus was somebody dear to God, somebody near to God. Maybe they even knew that he was the only begotten of the Father, as John calls him, full of grace and truth. In any case, Jesus told them to shut up. So why? Why? Didn't Jesus want people to know who he was? I mean, he was the Messiah, the appointed, the anointed one, the king. He was the son of David. Historically, his genealogy proves it. He was the Son of God. But God's idea of messiahship was radically different from the crowd's idea. His idea was grace and truth and sacrifice and love. They're the marks of authentic messiahship. But they were expecting a powerful ruler who would overthrow the Romans and make Israel top dog again. That was the Messiah that they wanted. And so on Palm Sunday, the crowd praises, "Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord." But a little later, the crowd calls out, "Crucify him, crucify him," because Jesus wasn't what the Messiah watchers wanted. He hadn't come to beat the Romans. He had the popularity, he had the people's imagination and loyalty, he was charismatic, he had the support of God as witnessed by his many miracles, but his idea of being a Messiah was a disappointment. He hadn't come to make Israel top dog or to beat the Romans. His ideas were bigger than that. He was more than they could comprehend. That's why Jesus had compassion on them, it says, but he did not trust himself to them because he knew what was in them. He was Emmanuel, God with us, come to his people as one of them, come to humanity as one of us to deliver us from a much bigger oppression than the Romans, to bring us, to restore us to the heart of God. So the day's over now, and the people have gone home and they go back to work, and they're not part of the crowd, and they start to think about who Jesus was. And maybe they wondered about that day at the sea, who that amazing man was who healed the sick. And they talk about him. He'd inspired hope. Who was he? Was he John the Baptist, they said? Was he Elijah, come back from the dead? But things aren't always what they appear. And the day would come when they would hear of this man again, and that would change everything. All I'm saying today is maybe I need to look beyond appearances. It's hard for us too, we get caught up with all the sort of churchianity, all the religiousness of who Jesus is. Many times I hear somebody describe the God that they don't believe in, and I feel like saying, well, I don't believe in that God either. Or people say, oh, Jesus is all right, but this church is really naff. And I have to say, well, I think a bit like that, and I'm the pastor. Sorry. I have to agree. And even when we meet Jesus, our categories are not enough. They come a bit short. They say, well, is Jesus like a prophet? Well, he is a messenger from God, but he claims to be the message from God as well. Is he a priest? Well, he is the priest standing between us and God, but he claims to be the offering that the priest makes, the sacrifice that the priest brings as well. Is he some kind of a king, some kind of authority figure? Well, sure, but he also claims to be the kingdom itself. So Jesus stands in the middle of the jostling crowd, and he knows there's not much chance of offering the word, no reasoned discourse, but he can't help but offer God's love, and compassion oozes from him. He heals despite himself. He shuts the demons up because their voice is confusing the issue, and they in the crowd are not capable for seeing him as he really is. Are you? Amen. God bless you today.